Welcome to episode 72 of Stageworthy. I'm your host, Phil Rickaby. A while back, I read Austin Kleon's book, Show Your Work, which I recommend to anyone who makes stuff. In the book, the author talks about the importance of sharing your process as a way to build your audience. Now, there is a part of me that just shudders at the idea of building my audience. The whole selling yourself thing has a certain ick factor for me, and I think I'm not alone at that. There's something about selling myself that just seems disingenuous. But then, if we, as theater makers, can't do that, how the hell are we supposed to sell our art? I'm reminded of being at the Toronto Fringe Lottery every year and having Sue Edworthy remind everyone who gets a show into the Fringe that they need to tell people about it. I guess there are a lot of people who are as uncomfortable with self-promotion as I am. But she's right. If we want people to come to our shows, we have to let them know about it, which means we need to build our audience, right? Okay, so in January I decided that since I didn't get into Fringe this year, that I was going to produce something myself. So I booked a space, and now I have to write a thing. So as I write that thing, I'm posting about it on my personal website, philrickaby.com. Now, since I'm just in the writing stage, I'm going to be talking about how the writing is going and the stages of creating this play, but as things get closer to production, I'm going to post about that too. So if you want to follow along as I post about this, go over to my site, that's philrickaby.com, and click on the blog section. And while you're at it, why don't you do the same? I would love to hear about your process and what you're working on. So if you have something to share, tweet at StageworthyPod with the hashtag #ShowYourWork. While we're talking about tweeting at me, remember that you can find Stageworthy on Twitter and Facebook at StageworthyPod, and you can find the website at stageworthypodcast.com. My guest this week is Alex Dault. Alex is the artistic director of Theatre by the Bay in Barrie, Ontario, a company previously known for performing classical work, but who recently made the transition to devising new work. Well, when were you at George Brown?
I was at George Brown from 2007 to 2010.
So after Young Centre? Or pre-Young Centre?
After Young Centre.
Okay.
So I was in the Distillery District campus. Mm-hmm. And that was part of what drew me to study at the theatre school. That was a new thing, and it seemed really exciting that there was this partnership with Soul Pepper, and which when I got there I realized is not really a thing.
I think the promise of what that was supposed to be was not realized.
No.
But, I mean, I think being in that area is great.
Yeah.
For a student. Who was the head of acting at the time when you were there?
Todd Hammond.
Todd Hammond, okay.
Yes.
Because I was there in the Heiner Piller Peter Wilde years.
Oh, really?
On River Street.
Oh, okay.
In the theater that is no longer, the building that is no longer.
Yeah, no, but I've heard so much. I've heard a lot about it.
The legendary days of George Brown.
What year did you graduate?
93.
93.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you go to there was a reunion this year. There was the 40th reunion or something.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that.
I'm trying to think. There were a few people. Do you Brendan Murray? It was there. Brett Christopher. Any of those guys? No.
Those names aren't ringing a bell. They could have been. They could have been after me.
After you, yeah.
It's one of those things. Like that building has I know people who you mark the history of the George Brown Theatre School by location.
Yeah, that's right.
River Street location, and there's a certain camaraderie among the people who went through that because that building you had 2 studios and one
The
theater.
Stories are that you guys slept there. You would sleep overnight.
I mean, not everybody, but you come in the morning and there's somebody who just stayed there. Because, I mean, if you knew that if you were working on a thing until 1 or 2 in the morning, Well, it's going to take me that long to get home. I'll just sleep here. Places to sleep, and you could do it.
See, that makes total sense to me. There were a couple funny stories about it was hard to get a rehearsal room, so I would. Some of the dressing rooms would be rehearsal spaces, and like I would just book it the whole day, and I would live in there, right? And people kind of make fun of me or whatever, but it makes complete sense. You would stay overnight,
absolutely, absolutely,
sleep in the halls or whatever.
And then after that era, there's the Casa Loma campus,
right?
Era where I know a few people who went through there. But I mean, the thing about the Casa Loma campus, everything I've heard about that was everything felt makeshift,
right?
Because it was
transitional,
yeah. Because they were just waiting until the new space got built,
right?
And then when I first started getting a look at the facilities in the distillery, I was like, fuck, we had like it was a disease factory. If a person sneezed in one room, by the afternoon everybody had it because the system would just move it through.
I'm not gonna lie, I have zero complaints. Those are the most beautiful facilities. It was a dream to study in that. Cool. What they set up there. Yeah, cool. I sometimes hear rumors that they might leave, they might go to somewhere bigger or something, and I'm like, no, it's perfect the way it is. They've got 3 studios and 2 classroom spaces. It's
the problem with going to a bigger space is you would find yourself in a position where you would need more students to make it work, which means that you'd be taking in an even larger first year.
Yes. And need to cut more people.
Yeah,
I know. Yeah.
Which, it's hard enough. Like the year before me, they ended with by the end of their third year, there's a cast of 4 people, down from 30. And the 2 years before me, when I was in first year, the year that was 2 years before me, they had 4 people
from 30.
That was their graduating class, was 4 people. And then the year directly before me, I think had like 15, and we were about 14, 15 when I graduated.
Wow. Ours was we went from start at like 34, went down to 17 people. Yeah.
When did you know that the theater was something that you wanted to do?
Professionally?
Even before you had an idea that there was like a professional thing.
When I was in the 4th grade, this guy came to my school who brought a bunch of kids together in the class, and he's like, how would you guys like to create a play? And what that meant was he rolled out this big piece of butcher's paper and gave us crayons, and he just had us draw. He took that away and came back with a script. He created a text out of our imaginations. And so that was my introduction to theater, was that it wasn't like, we start from a script and we learn this thing. It came from us. It came from our own devising and went through a kind of a process. This guy, I tracked him down using Twitter like 20 years later, and I learned that he had been in Montreal at a time when the theater there was just like it was in a really kind of a golden age. Robert Lepage was kind of a younger creator. Yeah. And he'd been inspired by him. He'd been in my town, which is in Barrie, for 1 year, and he worked with happened to work with our class. It just seemed amazing that I'd had contact with this kind of creative spirit, right? So anyway, that experience really inspired me and changed my life. Prior to that, I had I don't know. I didn't really know I wasn't really good at anything. I'm really kind of clumsy, bad at math, all kinds of things, And so theater, it was something I was actually really good at, and I liked being in front of an audience as well.
This was your, with this guy, that was the first time realizing that you enjoyed, the audience?
I liked everything about theater. I liked the creative process. I liked rehearsing. I liked being in front of an audience. I liked playing a character. All of the great things were introduced to me in that one project.
Was there an opportunity to do plays through your public school experience?
Not really. In both my elementary and secondary school, if there was an opportunity to do a play, it was kind of a special circumstance. I didn't go to any kind of art school.
They didn't do a yearly thing?
It was sort of ad hoc.
Okay.
Yeah.
Some of my experience, when I was in public school, there was a teacher who would have us do these musicals each year. I'm pretty sure that we didn't do them legally. I'm pretty sure that he was not getting.
He just got the. He's like, we're just going to do.
No, he's like developed his own script. You know, I think he read the original and then like developed his own that was appropriate for children. And like I remember doing Oklahoma and shit like that. But it was just, I think that was just I as a writer myself, I can't forgive him, but he exposed me to so much theater.
Right.
At the time.
Yeah.
And then in high school, every year there was like some kind of show. There were a couple of years when it was ad hoc as well, but there was like a teacher who'd be like, they'd come in and they'd be like, I'm driving this year, and we're going to do Grease this year or something like that.
It really relies on the personality of a teacher to come in and share those skills and that knowledge. And often they have no idea what they're doing.
Sometimes they don't,
but
they have to have the willingness to put in the extra hours to do it, because they have to get the script, they have to get the space, they have to have rehearsals, they have to somehow get a set built in a school system. They're probably making costumes or whatever. It's like the ultimate in indie theater.
Oh yeah,
with like zero budget half the time.
Yeah, well, this guy, this mentor, and I'll name him Mark Lemire, because I have nothing but respect for this guy who did this thing. He had apparently been hired by my French. This play was in French. This French Catholic school. He'd been brought there to make a slideshow using photographs, and they gave him a box of photographs. A really simple thing. He wasn't even there as a teacher, and he just happened to be at like a teachers meeting, and the principal's there. And this guy's very creative, right? He's like, well, yeah, we're going to have like projections on all the walls. This is like 1994. We're going to have projections on all the walls. There's going to be smoke and music. We're going to have like this thing. And they were all just like, what are you talking about? We just want a slideshow.
Yeah.
And then next item, the school play. Does anyone want to do it? All the teachers are kind of looking at their shoes. And this guy just said, I'll direct your play. I'll do that. And the principal's like, okay, well, there's no money for it. So this guy would go around just like sourcing stuff, like begging, stealing. He got the principal to give him a portable to like rehearse the show in. Yeah, I don't know. He did have that indie producer spirit for sure.
I remember doing Grease in high school, and they had they got the shop, like the automobile department, to give them some junker. And it's supposed to be a 50s car, but all they could get was like a Volkswagen.
But still having the car on stage, that's awesome. Yeah.
And then they like took it apart, made it hollow and shit, took the wheels off. But it was like, the teacher was like, I need to make this look like it's 50s somehow. Somehow. I think they did it with the paint job, but nobody gave a shit. But so there was that initial exposure to theater. And when was it that you decided that this is something you were going to do with your life?
When I actually, the first season of the Theatre by the Bay brought Shakespeare to Barrie. They had this big tent by the water. They did Midsummer Night's Dream. It was my first time seeing, I'd seen stuff at Stratford, but seeing professional Shakespeare like that close. Daryl Cloran, who's now AD at Citadel, directed it. He was a young director just out of school himself. He'd graduated from Queen's. And I just remember being like, this is what theater can be, and these guys make a living doing this. That, like, my mind just exploded seeing that. And I think that's when I was like, I want to be like them.
Right. Yeah. Any resistance from parental units to the idea of pursuing theater?
My parents were super supportive. Super supportive. I was very fortunate in that. Like, they never said, are you sure you want to do this? Maybe they were naive, but I think they also knew that was what I was good at, and that's what I loved doing, and they always were very supportive of that. Yeah.
Speaking of Theatre by the Bay, how long have you been involved with Theatre by the Bay? Not as an audience member?
So the following year, I was part of the original Young Company. When I was 17 years old, we did Treasure Island. We performed on the set of Romeo and Juliet. It was under the tent. And we actually had bigger audiences than Romeo and Juliet. They had to add performances onto our run because kids love pirates and love Treasure Island. So that summer it was like being a rock star, right? You often hear that, but so I did that, and then in subsequent years I was an actor with the company. I was usually the smallest part,
right?
But I was like the local boy who's made good, who's in the cast,
right?
With and I got to work with some incredible actors, for my age, and learned a huge amount just watching, being totally terrible, like Richard Rose, like being like, oh my god, how am I going to teach this kid who knows nothing about acting, to
right.
And Dault was the director of one of the shows. Anyway, I acted with the company for maybe 5 seasons, and then at some stage, Larissa Mayer, who was artistic director at the time, asked me to direct a production for them. And the same summer, I proposed that we add a show on to the season that would be a walking tour show about the history of Barrie.
Okay.
Which Larissa was initially like, that's totally insane. We have no money. No, absolutely not. And I think I got her to commit $1,200. I said, I'll do it for $1,200. I'll create this show and get the actors. We'll make it happen. And somehow managed to create this show. To me, that again, that now seems insane to me that I did that, and why would I do something for so little money? But the actors and I researched like the history of Barrie. We wrote songs, we created scenes, and created this tour route, and that was a really popular offering. So then I came back the next year, directed for them again, remounted 9 Mile because there was a demand for it to return. And then I was producing other shows for the company. At around that time, Larissa stepped down, and I became the artistic director of the company. And I started slowly kind of pivoting us more towards stories that were about Barrie as opposed to Shakespeare.
Right.
Which some people were, a bit up in arms about, and some really welcomed. I certainly thought our audiences welcomed it, and it showed in an increase in ticket sales.
There's always some kind of resistance to change, especially in the theater, but in pretty much anything.
Yeah.
So changing from Shakespeare, which some people expected, to something else people can be resistant to that. But there's also, there's also something to be said for people being able to see themselves on stage.
Yes.
And the attraction of being able to relate a little more to stories about where you're from than these people who lived 500 years ago, or didn't even live 500 years ago. They're fictional things, and they speak in this weird way.
Yes.
And things like that.
It's always, Shakespeare, I think, was initially very popular, but it was a novelty. And I think in the hands of a great director, it has appeal for everybody. Like in Richard's hands, I found it could reach everyone. James Wallace, who directed for us, when you're a young guy, he does all the. Do you know James?
No.
He does Shakespeare Bashed in the Fringe Festival, and he's been at Stratford this past summer, and is there again this year. It is really accessible to everyone, but you need those people who could do that. I love Shakespeare. I love being in those plays, and I certainly I'm familiar with the canon, and I think it's a wonderful thing. But I just, through many conversations with people in Barrie, kind of found that they didn't connect with it as much as they might, and in fact, just the fact that it was Shakespeare was scaring them off from even coming to see it.
Well, because there's some people who their connection with Shakespeare, which is due to the way that we teach it, unfortunately, they have a bad they have a
bad experience in high school.
Yeah, I don't like Shakespeare. That's what they're going to say.
Yeah,
is because of high school I don't like Shakespeare.
Yeah, and I know why. I go into the schools and teach like a workshop in Shakespeare, and I try to teach it from the perspective of an actor, who has to deliver the lines and therefore understand what's being said. And I'm trying to explain this to a bunch of grade 12 students, and the teachers are there going, "Yes, but how? What season does this this monologue fall into? Is it fall, winter, and spring? And
none of it has any real meaning.
No, what it amounts to is like an analysis.
Yeah.
And they're preparing you to work in higher IT or something, like where it's like, I'm like, that has nothing to do with this play, the way you're trying to break it apart and categorize
and Shakespeare would be horrified by that kind of analysis, I think.
Yeah.
Like
for sure.
the way that they teach it and the way that they analyze it. He's just writing this shit as fast as he can to get it on stage. And we're like, 500 years later or whatever, like treating it like he was like agonizing over all of this symbolism and stuff that we've sort of inserted onto it.
Yeah, no, he's trying to reach an audience, and connect with an audience and tell a story and make people laugh. Really,
When you were thinking about making that change, and I've just shrunk my chair. This is one of those things, you just hit the chair in a wrong spot and you sink. When you were thinking about that change, was that something that, did that scare you? Changing from what Theatre by the Bay was used to, or was it? Did you somehow know it could work, or did you think it could work?
I certainly had some reservations, and I did make it a gradual transition. We're still inside it. It's been going on for a couple of years where I would offer a Shakespeare, but I would also in the same season be offering a local story, like a story about Barrie during the First World War. Right? We have those run side by side, but I'm sort of slowly moving towards a situation where it's just all local stories. I think that when you are trying to sell a season to people or sell programming, it's always you want simple, clear messages.
Yeah.
So as opposed to saying, our 2015 season, we've got a little bit of this, a little bit of that, to be able to come out to them and say, local stories.
Yeah.
That's a strong kind of message. So that excited me.
Yeah.
I think I was considerate of respecting our audience that has been with us for 17 years. I was also eager to present them with something that was a little bit daring and new by saying local stories. That's what we're doing this year. Yeah.
One of the things that's always been sort of interesting to me about Theatre by the Bay, and one of the things that's curious, because I'm a Toronto guy, that means that I don't go to Barrie.
Of course.
I don't even go to Hamilton. I did the Hamilton Fringe this past summer. I know, like Hamilton, you can get there in like an hour or something like that.
Yeah.
It doesn't take that long. It's not hard to get there. It's not hard to see theater there. But it takes so far.
I know. Oh yeah.
And so,
well, especially when there's so much to do here already.
Yeah. But even then, like, maybe I'll hear about something interesting in Theatre by the Bay, and I just think to myself, it's so far.
I know.
How do I get there? And I'm sort of like thinking to myself, like, who has been the audience for Theatre by the Bay? Has it been local? Has it been hoping to get people
when
traveling?
I first came
Barrie?
in to my role, I asked that question and no one knew. So we started doing a lot. Like I implemented a lot of data collection through surveying, and I immediately identified the fact that it's almost 99% are just from Barrie. They're not they've not come out from Toronto. If they have come out from Toronto, it's because they know someone in the show.
Right.
We had a tourism representative for the region on our board, and they were constantly saying, we've got to get this group up from Toronto. We've got to get this group up from Toronto. And advertising in the Star, advertising in papers down here. And I just said, I don't think that those, doesn't matter what we say, they're not going to come up to Barrie to see a play.
Right.
Not, and at least not the kinds of things that we're doing right now. So let's not waste our energy on it. Let's focus on getting the people in this region and broadening our share of the market here. Now, there was an exception to this. Last summer, we produced Goethe's Faust, and I worked with the German consulate to bring up German Canadians who have a great interest in seeing Faust,
right?
And they commissioned like buses or chartered buses to come up to see the show. And we had people coming from Kitchener, Waterloo, and Toronto, and so doing something that kind of unique and unusual drew that group of people. Yeah.
It's interesting you talk about the surveys and knowing who your audience is, which is one of those things that I think is super important about when you're trying to do theater, is know your audience and know who they are and know where they are. And for theater, like it's almost astounding to me, and yet it also makes sense that when you ask that question, who's our audience, that nobody could tell you. It's like one of those things that I think a lot of times we don't think about. Well, we're doing theater, so people are going to come.
Yeah, we have kind of a vague idea of who is in the audience, but it's imperative that you understand that.
Yeah.
And how old are they? How old are the people who are coming to see your shows? And we learned it's like 18 to 25. Then there's a great gulf from 25 to about 50. And then 50, 60, 70, 80, those people are coming. But in Barrie, if you live in Barrie, in that age where we're not seeing them, it's because they have children and they're busy with their family. We might get that group in for our kids' show when they're bringing their kids to the show, but they're not coming out at night to see whatever it is we're putting on.
But you're seeing the vast numbers of your audience in the 18 to 25?
That's the majority of our audience.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you have to bottle that and sell that to people, because that's the demographic that here in Toronto and a lot of other places we're wringing our hands because we can't get them out. Like, how do we get the youth out? It sounds like tell them stories that relate to them.
Yes. And this is going to sound like sometimes people like literally roll their eyes when I say this, but put their friends in the show. Put their friends in the show. And and people go, well, that rings of community theater, and I always say to them, well, community theater is also extremely popular and sustains itself, right? I'm not afraid to draw, like, to bring young people, put them in our shows. For me, there's always a question of ratios of how many local people to how many professional people in the show, but those are very worthwhile questions to investigate. I have a saying that that also gets eyes rolled, but works magically, and it's only your friends come see your show, so have millions of friends, right? You have to kind of build on your networks. It's just that's just how it seems to work in this day and age. And how are you gathering, or how are you getting to know your millions of friends? I am involving them in the creation of the show in one way or another. So when we did our World War I show last year, we had our local militia battalion celebrating their 150th anniversary. And they had a committee that was, it actually reminded me a lot of like a theater board, but except populated with army colonels and generals. And they're all sitting around and they're saying, how do we get people to know who we are and what we've contributed? And I said, well, we're going to put on a play about your contribution and tell your stories. Help us do the research. Help us. Like, we want to have a member of the battalion in the show. And they found that guy for us. He had a little bit of acting background. He understood how to assemble a rifle. He knew all the drills. And he brought like a huge amount of knowledge to the production. But he also brought out the entire battalion to see the show. Many of these guys had not seen a play in 30, 40 years. That was incredible to have it in, like, audiences full of soldiers. That was... And we did it site-specific. The show was site-specific. We did it in the hall of Trinity Anglican, which is it's an old church in Barrie that's been there for like 163 years in the community. And they have a hall that I found it in my research had been used as a rec room for the soldiers when they were staying in Barrie before going overseas. And so there was this connection that I could draw to the material, to this space, and their whole parish, their whole congregation came out and saw the show and volunteered to sell tickets and sell cookies and that kind of thing. People, when they feel involved feel an obligation to not only come but to bring other people to see the show. So this is what I think regional theater companies should be doing to revitalize interest in the theater.
So you're saying that sometimes when we think about get people involved, we're thinking like, let them see what it's like in a rehearsal, show them a video, but you're talking about like get them
ownership,
involved.
Give them ownership over it. Make them a stakeholder. Like the sitting in a rehearsal thing. I've tried that, and it's just it's as hard as getting them out to see the play itself.
Because a rehearsal doesn't look awesome.
Sometimes it does.
Well, sometimes it does. It comes later on, but like if you get people at the wrong time during a rehearsal, even if you can get them in and it's not going well, they're like, what am I going to do? Like, I'm going to watch this thing?
Yeah. No.
So that sounds like that's been really successful.
Yes.
As well as telling the stories about letting people see themselves on stage. So what are you working on this year?
So this year, our project is The 5 Points, which is a documentary play about downtown Barrie. The 5 Points, if you know Barrie, is the central intersection in our downtown. It's where five streets encounter one another. It's a very strange street, a lot of confused drivers who approach it. The intersection is very unusual. We have our theater, the Mady Centre, where the show is actually going to be performed at one of the corners. Two of the other corners are where buildings have burned down. One, when a meth lab exploded and burned 2 restaurants and a bunch of apartments down. They've left that as kind of this weird, like, fallow field with, like, spruce trees and benches.
Okay.
The other side is it's where we used to have a Sam the Record Man was there, burned down. Now there's a hot dog stand that is closed during the day, but only opens at 1 a.m. and has this massive lineup that goes down the street. And then one corner, which is like a Flatiron built type building called the Bourbon. Which is a bar of eccentrics and locals, always hanging out on the front stoop. And then there's a Tim Hortons on one of the corner where, like, pretty sure there's a kind of a cocaine ring is sort of operating, and there's constant drug deals or fights happening on it. And when people speak about our downtown, they often make reference to the 5 points. But for me, it's a metaphor of 5 points of view, 5 perspectives of different groups that exist in Barrie, and all have an idea of what the downtown is and what the downtown should be, and none of those points of view have anything to do with one another. They don't adhere in any way. Sometimes are completely contradictory, and none of these groups of people talk to each other. And so we are interviewing people who live in our downtown, who work in our downtown, who live in Barrie, who work in Barrie, about their thoughts on that. And our actors are doing like verbatim impersonations of those interviews. And it's I know that's a huge amount, but the additional part of this is my wife and I, who are kind of the co-real leads on the project, both studied at École Philippe Gaulier in Paris, or at Temp, and we're approaching it from like a physical theater perspective. So lots of chorus, lots of movement, big characters. It's comedy, it's funny, and it's built on the concept of le jeu. So like there's a game kind of underneath everything in the show. Yeah.
Have you ever done verbatim theater before?
No, I haven't. I actually have never. I know this is a first foray for me into verbatim theater.
So how does one prepare to dive into verbatim theater for the first time?
I feel like that's like, you're like asking a guy who's taking water skiing lessons, how does one prepare to water ski? And the guy's like, I guess I just listen to my instructor and I hold on to this pole. So how have I prepared? I've watched a lot of verbatim theater.
Okay.
The National Theatre in the UK has some amazing online resources. They've documented their processes of creating shows like Black Watch and London Road.
Yeah.
And I've watched those. I've read some books on devising and on creating theater that has sort of social impact. And then I'm just imagining what a verbatim process looks like, writing it out and bringing it in. And so because I actually haven't come to the end of this yet, I don't know if this is actually the way to go about it. We're having. Oh, and I should also say, my wife did you're familiar with Fixed Point. Yeah. She did they're doing these intensives right now where they share their methodology. And we've kind of approached them and said, we're going to use some of your techniques in our own process. They're okay with that. We're going to acknowledge them. But yeah, taking some of the things that have worked for them and bringing that into our process.
It's interesting that you're sort of like faced with, and some of the work that you've done before, it sounds like it may have been devised theater as well, or
yes, I've done lots of devised work but I don't know, and this is my company, Single Thread in Toronto, we work with history as our source material, so that will be old newspapers or facts about wheat or interviews with curators. This is a totally different thing. We're working in the contemporary, right? I think what's different is that with history, there's sort of a need to create an imagined space built on fact. Whereas with this, I'm finding people in interviews will say things, and I might even at that moment know that's totally untrue. But my obligation is not to edit to tell the truth. My obligation is to represent the perspectives of people. Right? So if someone believes that building hundreds of condo buildings in the downtown is going to save it and revitalize it, even though I disagree, I'm going to represent that view on the stage. Right?
That's interesting. So instead of normally the playwright or the deviser might be imposing their own view on whatever it is that they're doing. You're committed to sort of like representing what people say.
My thesis is there are many different perspectives on this downtown.
Yeah.
And you are likely unaware of the other four. You're very much in your own sphere, right? I think this translates on a more universal level.
I was just thinking it does.
To some of the conversations that have been generated by the American election of people are inside their little world.
Yeah.
And they are like editing whose voice they hear on their social media feed. So it's an echo chamber.
Yeah.
And the actors in the cast and I are like shattering the walls of that chamber and getting outside of it and talking to people.
Anything that you've learned that you care to share about the different perspectives about the downtown?
Sure. I mean, I'm trying to. I've learned a lot of things.
Of course,
actually. Well, there's a group of people that I have learned to have more respect for, and that is, there was a group of people I used to refer to as Duck Dynasty. And I would encounter Duck Dynasty when I was working on Promenade Days, which is a festival in Barrie, trying to get people to come to see our plays. Right. And most people will at least talk to me for a couple minutes and let me do my spiel. And sir, Hamlet is a great thing. You got to come see it. But there were people who wear like army fatigues and camo, and like they always have like long greasy hair, and it's they wear sunglasses, and I'm always I used to kind of be disparaging of that group of people because I'd be like I don't know. It's just I think of the stereotypes the associated with that group of people, but through our work we have gone out to people who are doing ice fishing, or people we've gone out in the woods and talked to people at like hunting camps and asked them about, what do you think of Barrie? What do you think of the downtown? And kind of going onto their turf, going into their territory, my eyes have kind of been open to what it is they do and what that worldview is, what that lifestyle is, what's beautiful about that, why that is something that you would do and kind of embrace and represent all the time and live, and how out of my own depth I am when I'm there. So I completely understand why would they want to see a play? That has nothing to do with what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, right? So that's one group that I've kind of sort of grown to have more respect for through doing this.
It's interesting. There's you were mentioning that on one of the 5 points there's a theater, and you're going to be performing in that theater.
Yeah.
Have you learned anything about what the people that you're speaking to think of theater that you didn't know?
I'm planning to ask that question. Yeah. We haven't gone there yet. I didn't want to start with that because I worried it would be too too self-indulgent or like navel-gazy, but it has absolutely been on my mind.
Oh, yeah.
Partly because I kind of know what some people would say. Like, on promenade days, I stand outside for 3 days, 8 hours at a time, and I talk to hundreds of people, and I say, would you like to come see the theater? And I get a lot of people who say, I hate the theater. I hate the Mady Centre. That is not, like, we don't do that, right? There is a significant proportion of people who do not like the theater.
For those people, do you have a sense of what is it? The concept? Is it what they have an idea of what theater is that they don't understand, or are they those? I saw a play once and I didn't like it, because I've encountered those people.
There's some of that for sure. I saw a play when I was in the 6th grade. I didn't like it, and I always kind of yell after them as they're going down the street. I almost feel like obligated to do it. I'm like, give it another chance. Yeah. Give us a chance, right? Yeah. Because I know, I mean...
it's like it's the one art form that people feel comfortable saying, I saw a play once and I didn't like it, so I don't like theater.
Oh, yeah.
But if they were saying that, like, nobody says, I saw a movie once that I didn't like, so I hate movies.
I hate all movies. Yeah. Or I saw saw a painting, I didn't like the painting. Yeah. Or I saw a picture.
I saw a TV show that I didn't like, and I'm done with TV now. Yeah. Like, that doesn't happen. But theater, there's something about it that makes people say...
Yeah. I think it's because it's a time-based medium. It demands a certain amount of your time.
Sure.
And whereas a painting, it's like, no, I can look at it for 5 seconds and then be on my way.
Yeah.
But then with movies, it's so kind of built into popular culture that, somehow it circumvents that. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, if I understood exactly why people hated theater...
you could bottle it and sell it as a solution.
I used to hate onions, and I didn't eat onions on anything. I'm like, I don't want onions on anything. But now I love them. They're great because I tried them in a few different dishes, and it's not rational. I don't think it's ever rational.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's one of those. Sometimes I think that part of it is because of the effort to go to theater. There's a movie theater on everybody knows where their local movie theater is, right? And they know how to get to it, and they know what's playing there. Theater, you usually have to travel a little bit to get there. Maybe you have to take the car out, get a babysitter. You're going to be there for a couple hours. Probably going to get dinner beforehand. There's all of these efforts that we tell ourselves, and I could just stay home and watch Netflix.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Like last night I was invited to go see... Stupid Fucking Bird.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I had a free ticket to see the show, but I'd been rehearsing all day.
Right.
And I was coming back into Toronto on the bus, and I had this moment of, I should just tell them I'm sick. I can't go.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, no, suck it up. I heard the show's great, and I'm so glad I went.
Right.
Like, it was like so. Did you see it?
I haven't seen it.
Oh man, it's good. It was like wonderful. It was exactly what my soul needed at the time. It was so refreshing to see, and I drew great energy from seeing it.
It's interesting when a theater finds their audience. I was talking with Eldritch Theater a little while ago.
Eric Wolf?
Yeah. And there's a group, he knows, like, that audience waits for him. Like, that audience, if he doesn't do a show at Halloween, they're emailing saying, where's your show this year? What are you doing this year? Like, they're hungry for what he does. And when you manage to find that, that's so much gold. But to find that, you have to know who they are.
Yes, absolutely. And that starts with making decisions based on evidence and doing data collection.
Yeah.
It does start with that.
Yeah.
I actually, we started out by talking about how I work in IT.
Yeah.
Like, that's something I kind of learned from working here is they don't make decisions without a huge amount of data to back up those decisions.
Right.
And I kind of was impressed by that, and I thought, why aren't we doing that more in theater at the indie level anyway? I think the answer is because we're barely able to even put the shows on. We're stretched so thin. Yeah. But it is with Theater by the Bay. It's a regional company. I've got a little bit more of a foothold, a little bit more. We actually have an office, which is great. Some computers, summer staff. I actually have the resources to collect data, so it's a priority.
When you were talking about starting to collect the data, was there any resistance to finding to that?
With who? The people I was...
The board or the people that you were working with? Was there resistance to answering the question, or were they into it?
No, there wasn't resistance, but there was resistance to listening to decisions made based on that evidence. People, on the board had really... They had an anecdotal understanding of the audience, and they clung to that anecdotal understanding. And then I was just saying that's not necessarily true, right? That's not necessarily where that audience is coming from.
Do you remember what the big surprise in data versus the anecdotal was?
Oh, that audience. I'll give you the big one. Okay. It was that the majority of our audiences were coming because they knew someone involved in the show. And that number was so astronomically higher than social media or television, radio, newspaper, advertising. Like, they came, and maybe they saw, of course, there's always that thing of, there's that triangle or whatever, you see it in a couple different places before you feel that compulsion. But they came because, they identified as having come because they knew someone involved in the show. And it was it was a bar graph, and that bar was 100 stories taller than anything else. And it was that thing of, I think the block for people is, well, that's embarrassing. That they only came because they knew someone in the show. That's embarrassing. And I'm like, no, we just need to understand how that kind of operates. And I actually that was from a production of As You Like It that we'd done. And I said, okay, I'm going to take the evidence, I'm going to apply it to this production we're going to do about World War I that we devised. We researched, devised, created with. I made it this huge local cast. I put the ratio higher on local actors, all local technicians. I brought in my team of ringers to act as designers. I had a local costume designer, involved all these different groups in it. We sold out 3 weeks of shows. It was like, and my evidence was completely backed up by that result. And I'm going to do it again with the 5 points. That's going to happen again because as we're doing the interviews, I'll give you one before you go. We've got these postcards that have the sort of media for the show, 5 points, a documentary play about Barrie, and on the back there's a little dotted space. Phil, you have been interviewed for the 5 points. Your story,
right?
Alex's data will be featured. Okay, that's not a good.
No, but
but it will be featured in the show on these dates, and you can put that up. So your story is going to be in the show.
Right.
We've already got hundreds of these out there, and I know that our message is starting to reach because people are, when they see me in Barrie, and I'm a man about town.
Yeah.
They're saying, "Oh, I heard you're doing this show about downtown Barrie. That's really cool." The word is spreading. Right.
That's good.
Yeah,
that's good. And when does the 5 points happen? When does this happen?
That's going to be July 19th to the 29th.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a relatively small window.
It is.
Is there Shakespeare along with that? Is this what Theatre by the Bay is doing?
So the shows are the 5 points. Land of Make Believe, which is like it's a panto, created by two local creators.
Nice.
That's toured schools and that kind of thing. And then we are bringing back our World War I show in November for Remembrance Day, and then it's going to tour the county, go to Bay Sport, and
nice.
Yes,
that's great.
That's the season. Yeah. So it's our first season not doing a classical production or a big musical.
Has anybody complained about that?
No.
Amazing.
I haven't heard a word.
That's neat. I mean, it's interesting that we would think, my anecdotal opinion on that would be that there would be people who'd be like, "Well, you're not doing Shakespeare this year. I don't know what you're gonna do." The people who would be complaining about the lack of the musical or the Shakespeare.
Yeah, I held a retreat of artists. Maybe there were 10 artists. We went up to a cottage in Muskoka, and two of the actors said, "Well, you got to be careful. People are going to feel left out or left behind by it, and I think we should still be doing Shakespeare." But those were the actors, and the actors, of course, they love doing the Shakespeare because I've been an actor in tons of Shakespearean plays. It's a rush,
of course.
So I don't know. They're I haven't had any audience members yet be like, "You should be doing more Shakespeare." I miss. Whereas I have dozens of people writing to me saying, "I loved how you featured a story about my grandfather, my great grandfather." I had descendants of characters in the show call me and say, "Man, my great grandmother who ran the Red Cross would have been so honored that you did this." I don't know. So it leans overwhelmingly to a positive response to doing that.
There is, we have in I don't know about many other places in Canada. I think this is I don't think it's just Canada. I think we do this a lot. We lean on Shakespeare a lot. We lean on the classics a lot, but we lean on Shakespeare pretty heavily, and partially because I think you don't have to pay royalties because he's dead, but also I think because we lack the confidence to put our stories on the stage, and I think I think that from what you're saying, from this, you have a body of evidence that says put your audience on the stage, and they will come to see. They will come.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You said it very well. I agree with that.
And
I think I'm certainly not calling for I once read something that said a 5-year moratorium on Shakespeare. I'm not calling for a moratorium on Shakespeare. I'm really speaking very specifically about Barrie.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's based on 17 years of experience with that particular audience.
Right.
Barrie is unique in that it doesn't have a university.
Right.
It doesn't have a theater department. There isn't a kind of familiarity with a Chekhov or an Ibsen.
Right.
Those names I don't think mean as much in that community.
Right.
So you have to take a different approach with them. It's actually there's such exciting opportunities inside that.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, it's interesting because I mean, how many of the people who are living there know their own stories? Like, they know their story, but they don't necessarily know the story of Barrie.
No,
right?
they don't. They don't, like, you know, that was, you know, with 9 Mile Portage, people have said, oh, that's why Barrie was built here. That's how we came to be. And I drew this, you know, there's this sort of thing of, why is our downtown such a sloppy shit show with all the bars and everything? And in 9 Mile Portage, I had this big scene where it was just talking about when we had 36 people living in the town around the little Portage site. We had 2 bars. We had 2 taverns for 36 people. And then there were more, like, because the industry was all around alcohol and people staying overnight before they went on the Portage, traveling to the Great Lakes. So kind of at our foundation, at our core, we're a town that, like, loves whiskey, and we love alcohol. And then, of course, that's the yang to that is a strong Methodist community that resisted that and opposed that, and has always kind of kept the alcohol thing in check from getting too out of control. But I sort of identified this is, like, core to who we are. So don't be too frustrated by it. It's like, this is existential.
I mean, having been from there and knowing, like, do you know, like, because Barrie, you know, doesn't have a university, is there an industry that's not whiskey, that's not drink? What is the, like, who are the people who live in Barrie? Like, do you know? Because I always think of Barrie as people who live there so they can work in Toronto.
Yeah, that's a huge section of the population. It's a sleeper community for Toronto, especially the south end of Barrie. They, you know, if you want to be able to afford a nice house, I mean, at one time the house prices in Barrie have skyrocketed.
Right, of course,
30% jump this year. So that's one section of the community. There's Old Barrie. There's people who've been there for generations, and they are, you know, they exist to kind of often serve that population. They run all the kind of the retail stores, these established restaurants. They're professionals. They're the dentists and doctors. There's a number of high schools. You know, they're the teachers in schools. Who else is there? There's a lot of retired people in the community. Just trying to. And
I mean, it's hard to identify. Like, you can't, like, put, like, a thing on a place.
Yeah,
it's always interesting to say, like, I remember when I was in Winnipeg, I arrived and I was looking around and I sort of thought to myself, what is what's Winnipeg's thing? What's Winnipeg's industry?
Yeah,
because it's not, you know, I mean, at one point Winnipeg was built on the railway, but what is Winnipeg now?
Yes,
I never quite found that out. Yeah, but it's always interesting because, you know, I go to Hamilton and I know what Hamilton was.
Yes,
which it's not anymore.
It was like a steel town.
It was steel.
Yeah,
and they're not now. And now it's that whole search for what are we.
Well, we've had a number of major industries in the town. We had. The problem is I can only think of the ones that have closed down and moved away, right? Like, I can think of the Molson Brewery, which not only is no longer there, but now there's a strip mall on top of that. Right. There's a huge amount of, like, low-level retail that has sort of sprung up, and I think people kind of bemoan it a little bit. Like, it's the stuff that makes it indistinguishable from a Etobicoke or Ajax or Whitby or something. It's those like these, you know, big gigantic parking lots, and you know, there's a Boston Pizza and a Cineplex. And
it's like the Power Center Plaza Mall sort of thing.
And increasingly, the people who live in and work in Barrie work in these places. They work in the mall. They work in the strip mall. You know,
well, that's the Walmart effect. It is basically the same thing. It's the Walmart effect of like the homogenization of every place that we live in.
Yeah.
But the important thing is that people have the opportunity here stories about where they're from. And that's one of those things that can become one of the pillars and the part of the intimate fabric of a place, is to have their stories told.
And I'm trying to think of how to expand on that, to hear the stories of their neighbors.
Yeah.
Hear the stories of the people that I think they have constructed an image about, but that is totally wrong, basically. And that, I think, will be fascinating for them to see.
Yeah, sounds like it's going to be really interesting. I'd be really curious about how, when people see it and they're exposed to like those point of views that they've never even considered, the kind of conversations that they may have after that, which is one of those things that you really want.
That's what I want.
Theater.
Yeah.
You want people to leave.
Oh man, I want to generate,
to have these conversations.
Yes, I want to generate a robust conversation about our downtown.
Yeah,
and we've been having, like, the actors and I have been having those conversations with people on the street of like, what's, because we always close with, what's your vision for downtown Barrie? What do you think it could be?
Yeah,
and what a guy standing in front of the Fox Lounge, which is like a great like rockabilly punk music venue downtown, kind of an indie music venue. What that guy says downtown could be is so different from what my dad, who lives in Barrie, is going to say. Like, my dad's going to say, maybe have some more condos, maybe, so I'm worried my dad's going to listen to this. Get some the shelters to a different part of town. Don't have it all sort of focused there. Don't have, like, we have the prison in Penetang. Yeah. They get a bus ticket and it takes them to our bus station, and then that's where they end up. Yeah. Right? Figure that out. Sort that out. Just there are these different competing ideas, and kind of putting those out there, and then people go, oh, well, no wonder we're sort of stuck in this position, because this group is fronting this so hard. Right. This group's fronting this, and we're just kind of meeting each other and getting sort of stuck.
Well, because discourse is kind of dead right now. I mean, this is one of the things that we're seeing. Because of our echo chamber, we don't listen to each other so much anymore. And to have all of those opinions in a room, in a theater, putting people in a theater and confronting them with like these varying ideas in a space where they've learned that they have to listen, is subversive, and yet also what it should be. Like to have people in this space, because they are going to listen, and maybe they will come out with a different opinion than they went in with.
Well, that'd be amazing.
That would be amazing.
And I think also, just on a more kind of visceral level, they're going to laugh a lot at the recognition of themselves,
right? And
at the way they pronounce certain words and make certain sounds and express certain ideas. Like, it'll be like, that is. I want people to be going, oh my gosh, that's so true, and almost laughing. This often happens in verbatim or shows that are devised about a community. You're sort of laughing before you get to the punchline, because you're like hearing a street name. Right. Like, oh my god, that street. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
You almost know where this is kind of going. Right?
Yeah. Well, that sounds fascinating. We are basically out of time.
Cool.
Thank you so much for talking to me today. This has been a really great conversation.
Yeah. Thank you, Phil, for having me.